Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. I just want to tell you that a portion of episode 70 with Jay Carico was cut off due to technical issues. And so Jay will be back onto the show and we will continue to talk about the union activity and labor movement activity. But I just want to let you know that a portion of episode 70, the conclusion portion of that interview, was cut off abruptly due to technical issues. But nevertheless, enjoy episode 70, subscribe to Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, and remember, you can't unthink free thought. Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 70, believe it or not, episode 70. And we have our first four-time appearance guest on the show, Jay Carico, who I call now a friend of the pod. If you all want to know who Jay Carico is, you're going to know more about Jay today some. But Jay's also been on episode 5, 18, and 51. So go back and listen to those episodes, probably over 8 hours of content. And you're like, wow, two people talking for that long. So this is probably going to be a 2-hour episode as well. So it's going to balance out that time frame even more. So we're talking about a lot of information. I brought on Jay because we're going to talk about unions today specifically, and we may segue into other topics. But again, this person doesn't need an introduction now because Carico's been on the pod for the fourth time, our first four-time guest on the show. And we just want to say we appreciate your presence, your acceptance of our invitation, and welcome back to the show again.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I love your show. I love all the guests you have. And thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's just so exciting because when I first started this pod, I guess you can call it a pod. I mean, but it's really a YouTube channel driven network now, Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. I did not think that this was going to be something that I would grow a passion for because I am technically a professor. Like I'm not working right now. I'm not teaching anymore right now. This is my way of teaching, giving back to the people. This is kind of like a public service for me. But I was telling Jay off the air, I never shared this with the audience before. And then I get into an ad and then we will continue the conversation. But this was actually the start of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum actually came from my best friend who's actually not with us anymore. My best friend passed 11 years ago. And as a promise to him, Asa, I said that I would start a forum. Like we had been talking about it way back in the day, and it was supposed to be called Roundtable Social. And so I kept thinking about it more and more. I was like, I'm going to call it Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. And so for me, it's not a money incentive whatsoever. Like it's just the passion of the people, talking to the people, because that's what Asa would have wanted me to do was to talk to different types of people. And so the audience kind of has the first time of knowing what this is really about, the incentive behind it. So I think that's why it is going successfully is because there's definitely a deeper purpose behind it. And I'm just really glad that I've been able to meet you. I consider you a friend now and just, have real relationships with people. And hopefully the audience can develop that sort of rapport with people the year round. And I got to thinking after the 2020 shenanigans, we got to start getting back to talking to people who we normally wouldn't associate with and stop assuming that people have certain viewpoints and just test yourself and test everyone else around you because it's a ripple effect. Your best friend may not like what you have to say. Your family may not like what you have to say. Your inner circle may not like it. But I think being authentic with yourself will go a long ways into improving a lot of these breakdowns in communication that I think we're having today. And so I just want to say thank you to the audience. Thank you to Jay. And we've reached 92 people, 92 different countries, all 50 territories, states, and is going to continue. I just ask people to subscribe for free. Doesn't cost you a dime. Up the bottom right-hand corner of the video should have a little subscribe watermark I added on there. So just promote it to everyone that you know. I think there's something here for everybody. And we're going to keep this going. We have interviews all week long, all the way up until Christmas. And so Jay, if there's anything you want to open with specifically before we start, I know we're going to talk about unions a lot. There's just so much activity going on, Israel, Palestine, We have the presidential election coming up. Just so much to talk about. Is there anything that's on your mind specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely heartbreaking to see what's happening. Um, and I think it's, I think there's that specific issue of Israel Palestine. It's very it's just extremely heartbreaking. And but uh, it's an open air prison in Gaza, and um, sadly, Hamas was initially founded to fight secular socialist states in the region, and so and Netanyahu has said as part of the plan to make sure that Hamas is the only form of resistance that Palestinians can go through. And that's in order to have like almost what's the word for what's that? Sorry.
Yeah,
What's that?
a caveat.
Oh, to have a controlled opposition almost. Not saying that
Yeah,
they work together per se at all, but like saying that more of
have like
if
a
you have
buffer.
it's similar to Al Qaeda and ISIS in the way the U.S. funded those far right groups in order to fight communism in certain areas. But then they, eventually they could also, depending on how their interests align, they can also work with, I mean, the Israeli government has sent money to Ukrainian neo Nazis also. Like they were like, so this is it's I've been anti-fascist for years and have done security for synagogues. I've done I'm I don't this is not an issue of anti-Semitism. I think that's this is an issue, not to say there's not anti-Semitism in some circles, of Palestinian resistance, but this is a clear case of what seems to me to be apartheid. But even apartheid seems almost it's a genocide. But because with South Africa, for instance, there was it was the proletariat who was being segregated, right? It was working class people who were being segregated. I'm not saying the working class people were the white people as well, but but in Palestine, they don't Israel doesn't need their labor, right? And so they just want to kill them. I mean, not saying everybody in Israel. I mean, the Israeli government, the Netanyahu, the far right, um, wants to kill them, and so exterminate them, and it's collective punishment. It's all of these. It's there's the average age of a Palestinian is 19 years old, and half of them are babies, and like it's just a really sad situation, and my heart goes out to everything that's happening there, and I wish I could do more. I wish there was something that I could, that I could tell people that they could do other than boycott, uh, 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 divest, and sanction. That's the call, right? And I'm trying to follow that as much as possible. But kind of to caveat into another topic slightly, divestment is oftentimes what the college, if you go into professional activism and you have an idea about divestment, they'll certainly fund that, but if you decide to like send college kids to the Philippines to work with the resistance forces to help like learn how about sabotage and learn about like what revolution actually looks like, well, that will be cut immediately, even if it has less funding, even if it needs less funding. Any idea outside of divestment. So I'm not saying that divestment isn't, obviously boycott divestment, though anything you can, any political tool you can use, you want to use it if you can. But sadly that has, and then of course we were sanctioning. I just, just this is kind of unrelated to the situation right now, but somewhat. I heard that like more than half the nation, more than half of the nations right now are under sanctions. More than half the population right now is under sanctions by the U.S. So yeah, that's just so sorry. That was just when you bring that up. That's what's been going on my mind recently, and it's hard to it's hard to not say something right now when something like that's horrendous is going on. You know.
As far as the Hamas Netanyahu connection is concerned, and just the state of Israel and Palestine is concerned, to my knowledge, because Spike Cohen got, I mean, we know how it is. If you're on one side of this or the other, the anti-Semitism accusations, they're strong. They're going to come regardless. I've been called anti-Semitism by people like for no reason whatsoever, just for even, and I don't even say apartheid, for instance, and people will still call me anti-Semitic. I talked to Amira Napier in episode 66, I believe, and I urge people to subscribe to her Empathic Times YouTube channel. She's an independent media operator like we are here at Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, and she's Palestinian American. Her dad was, I think, 2 when he became a Palestinian refugee, and we talk about just how Semitic people, Jewish people, don't have a monarchy or a monopoly on the word, Semitism. The whole region is full of Semitic people, and like him or not, and like I said, people have different associations, and I think that's what people take this. They take it that because someone else says it that has a different political agenda, that means that you're associated with that. Because Louis Farrakhan has said the same thing. He's right about it, that Middle Eastern people in general are Semitic people. But it's like, how is that an anti-Semitic remark when it's just simply a fact? I mean, anyone in that region, I mean, they will all be classified as Semitic people. And it's originally a language thing, but somehow they've turned this thing to where it applies to white Jewish people in Israel and the States. And it's like, well, what about everybody else in the region? Aren't they Semitic people too? I don't understand that. It's almost like a wordsmithing type of agenda that's going on. But what I was going to say was the funding aspect of it. Spike Cohen, who's Jewish himself, said that initially the Israeli government funded Hamas as a way to break up the Palestinian Liberation Organization,
Yes.
the PLO. But that seems to be kind of forgotten about. But that's the history. I mean, that's the reality. That doesn't mean that people, or at least from my standpoint, it's sad that you have to defend yourself every time you say something, it seems these days. That doesn't mean that people who are saying that they're pro-Palestine means that they want Jewish people and Israeli citizens in general who are innocent to die. That's not what people are saying.
No.
I don't know how people jump to these conclusions, but just simply point out a fact. And it's just like, if you point out anything like that, it's just, oh, you're not all on board with Israel. Why is this a team sport thing is what I don't understand. And this leads me to a question I have for you. This is me kind of playing like devil's advocate, I guess, in a way, but does this seem like 2020 all over again when it comes to like an issue that's being used almost by the media to get people to pick a side one way or the other? It almost seems like the outrage, which is justified outrage, obviously, but this occupation has been going on for over 75 years. Is this something is this going to sustain itself, or is this still going to continue all the way up until the elections? Or is this going to die out in 3 months and there's going to be another story about another war that started between China and the US or whoever? Or is this something that's actually going to be sustainable?
So, that's a very good question. I think that I would say first that it certainly does seem interesting that around the time that everybody started to come kind of around to the idea that maybe the handling of the Ukrainian situation was not done very well by the US, right? That, I mean, that, okay, like the best thing you could probably say is Biden sent a bunch of banderites to their deaths unintentionally. You know what I mean? Like, okay, okay, I guess he emboldened BRICS. You know what I mean? If you wanted to put it in this like unintentional consequences of like U.S. for, and so now there's a lot of innocent people who certainly that were caught in the crossfire, and so it's these are sad situations that were created by a continual need for America to push its hegemonic structure throughout the world. This is the same that Washington is responsible for what's happening in Palestine right now. Washington is responsible for what's happening in Ukraine right now. And I think people are starting to realize that our government is responsible for things outside of it. I think that right now, when there's some people who have vested interest one way or the other, certainly, and that there's not going to be, but I think a lot of people are willing. Right now, it feels like people are more open to the idea that what the mainstream media is saying is just going to be something you need to look into afterwards. Like, you know what I mean? If they even watch, like, a lot of young folks don't even watch, they don't get their media for that. But I see my dad watching it, and oh man, I don't even. And to the point where when they're cutting off water, he's saying it's a good move. Like that. So that's the kind of that's the kind of rhetoric they're putting out, is this straight genocidal rhetoric. And it's interesting that Fox News was the ones that were more likely to air people who were making questions about the Ukrainian situation, because Biden's the one doing it, right? I mean, that's the reason. But they were more likely to, the right-wing media was more likely at this moment in time to position themselves as populists, to position themselves as anti-establishment, right? And right now, it does feel like that we are, I think Christian Perenni said this, but it might be somebody else. Maybe it was Jared Ball. I'm watching a lot of videos of both right now, so I might cross-pollinate some ideas here.
I'm interviewing Jared on Thursday, by the way.
I love him, man. He's awesome. He's so good. He's so good. And that intro to Black Power Media with the guy with the basketball, he can't take any shots, and then he puts the shirt on. Speaking
that's
of shirt,
funny, yeah, that's the ear doctor.
Yeah. I like your shirt, by the way.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is not merch or anything, but this is just a promotional tool. Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, testing it out. Maybe down the road we have something, for the public, but right now it's just a promotional tool. But I appreciate the shout out, no doubt.
So Christian Perenni or Jared Ball said something along the lines of, right now, it seems like the way that there's pro-establishment, anti-establishment rhetoric, right? There's these certain ways that we're dividing ourselves that aren't necessarily the typical. It doesn't seem like, it seems like we've kind of jumped something in the way that the media doesn't have, the media kind of caught up with. There was a time when it felt like, to me, the media kind of caught up with where people were in a certain way, where they could use our words in a certain way, and people could be like, oh, well, yeah, you know what I mean? And people who would be otherwise anti-establishment, right? And then I think the right wing started picking up on that and being like, well, we can do this. We can get a bunch of people who would otherwise essentially be leftists to be against the military-industrial complex by calling it the deep state, but only under certain guises. I mean, only under certain very specific auspices. You know what I mean? Not, they want war with China instead of war with Russia. They want war with Mexico instead of, so. And I think that, this is obviously just a ploy to criticize the person in power, and they'll probably do the same things regardless. And there is a deep state, but if you say that right now, it's sad, because a lot of people will be like, oh, that's a right-wing talking point. It's like, there's a military-industrial complex. There are defense contractors and giant corporations, that run everything, and they run our legislation, they run our media, they run our production, of course. And so, like, it's not, it's not a right-wing talking point. They're just using it right now, to say that, that what they're trying to say is that it's a bunch of liberals in power, but it's the center in a certain way, sort of maintaining itself. Because we used to see J20 and with the Trump situation, they're definitely going after people, right? And you can see that, but you, I mean, our J6, but also
No, you're good. I know
J20.
what you meant. I knew exactly what you meant. It's probably good. Hell, that'll keep us the censors away. By
But
calling, throw them off and add 14 days onto it.
yeah. So also there was that, whenever we came out and did the J20 insurrection or whatever, it's so funny because we had like thousands of people on the streets after Charlottesville, like a year after Charlottesville in Washington D.C., thousands of anti-fascists, and we didn't shit on anything that I know of. You know what I mean? Like we didn't. Well, like, so I don't know. It's like we're seen as like these, like, it's weird because traditionally in the regular engagement, it is the way that they point to their enemies is barbarism, right? Barbarism. But what they exhibited on that day can be is barbarism, right? But I will say this. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not barbarism in the sense of like they didn't kill anybody. It's, like, but at the same time, like the way they behaved. You know what I mean? Like it's not. Now, that being said, the working class rhetoric that they've been able to, the fact that they've been able to fool a bunch of working class people into following this stuff, it's pretty. It's good that there is working class people believing that if they do things, that things will change. That is not a bad thing to have people believe, right? Because it's true that is the one thing that will change things is working class people acting in a different way. The truckers strike, you know what I mean? They get it. They're starting to get it. And so if we can get them to realize that that it's not that hard, because there's a lot of people who are, I mean, I started out, almost libertarian before I got to know Chomsky, because that seemed like the thing that was anti-establishment. It was, I could clearly see and I think people are really close a lot of times, but then you have one of these moments like this, like you said, it pulls people back into an economy. Boom. Do I think it has legs to last until, sadly, if people, with the Ukrainian conflict it did continue to be a topic for a long period of time. This conflict, the news media runs it, and there's continual new things to kind of push a certain way to maybe, sadly, I do think that it could still be going on if the media didn't talk about it. We wouldn't, like what's happening in Kenya and Nigeria, right? Or what's happening with the G77 demanding a place on the UN Security Council. These are giant things, democratizing the UN. Like these are giant, but nobody talks about that. I've heard Ben Norton talk about it, right? Like, what I'm saying? I mean, that's it. Like that's the G77, specifically. I'm not saying there's not other people talking about it, but that's the one person I've heard talk about that. And I do consume a lot of leftist content. And so what I mean to say about that is we, at this moment, don't control that narrative, and because so many people still consume it, I mean, okay, Black Lives Matter did push to the point where they had to talk about something they wouldn't have talked about otherwise. People coming, that was something that I think showed with social movement, the UAW, the union. So getting into the labor stuff, I mean, there's certain things. So I think that this is like a it's a very, when there are certain issues that will bring us together, there are other issues that will demonstrably be divisive, right? And I don't mean to say that they're not important. Like if there's an open air prison and some people are saying it's okay to just bomb people into submission, that's it may be unpopular to say. I don't think that should happen, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't say it, even if it's divisive, right? Um, I like the way Lennon talks about this.
But is it really divisive? Because if the shoe was on the other foot, you know that the response would be completely different.
Right.
If that was the Palestinians bombarding Israel like that, it'd be held across the spectrum politically.
Right. But they don't have the power to do that.
But it honestly is now. And I know you saw my status that I put up. All the people that are supposed to be anti-establishment all agree on their stance when it comes to Israel versus Palestine.
Yes.
Like Israel, they all agree on it. Tulsi Gabbard, she's supposedly anti-war. Any of them, all these people who are talked about ending these wars. Okay, we don't even talk about Ukraine. It's like you said something then, which I caught my attention. The way you said it, it's almost like we've already turned the page on Ukraine and Russia. Yeah. And why is that? Doesn't that just prove that the deep state is present more than ever? The fact that one thing can happen and they can turn the page just like that. It's not like this conflict hasn't been going on. This has been going on for over 75 years. And so why is it now that it's being broadcast the way it is? I mean, we see it all. I mean, and disproportionately, the Palestinians have gotten killed. I mean, it's crazy over the course of this conflict.
98% of the deaths are Palestinian, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and they die, but Israelis get killed. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like this is the thing Michael Porter talks about. This is the thing that Noam Chomsky talks about in Manufacturing Consent, and Noam Chomsky in Inventing Reality. I mean, Michael Porter in Inventing Reality. But I think this is showing that anti-establishment thing is sort of an aesthetic, right? But I will say, just to critique the left on this as well, there is a segment of radical liberals, essentially libertarian socialists a lot of times, and I'm not critiquing their ideology here in this particular notion, but more of just the general. I'm not saying everybody does this, but they will generally have a certain geopolitical stance that lines a lot with the establishment Democrats, right? And you, I think I blame a lot of this on the Human Rights campaign, because they have a bunch of corporate donors, and then they point out things that, like, there were no pride flags at this place where gender has always been a spectrum. Like, okay, like it's like well, they didn't have the reason to do the thing. It's like culturally, like, historical. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's like, and then they're like wanting people to go in and invade, like, and stuff like that for like these so I think a lot of that has to do with like these NGOs from the what's that thing that Reagan started, the National Endowment for Democracy. Yeah, the NED, all these NED sponsored groups. Not that every NGO is bad by any means. There's great NGOs doing great work, but like, the you know, this is kind of this. This is the deep state, right? Like, this is the way of the color revolutions, the whatever you want to call it, the Hong Kong situation, Taiwan situation, where they put a spin on it that would appeal to the liberal left, because there's not a lot of context given for why, you know, they set up a situation basically, and then they put the camera on it when they're ready to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we found out that Egypt told Israel that there would be some sort of thing happening potentially, and then they moved the festival 48 hours notice. They moved it to a less secure area. It seemed like closer to Gaza. I mean, closer to the and I can't help but be reminded of the carnival happening outside of war, you know, out of the concentration camps during the Holocaust, like, and the people who wrote about that, and not to say that, you know, anybody of course, it's just that it just seems like you keep pushing the pressure, you keep poking, and poking and poking, and way more than poking, obviously, bombing and destroying and killing and murdering, and there's going to eventually be blowback. There's going to eventually be that thing, and then if you put the camera right at that moment of blowback at the situation, then you can get people of good conscience without a lot of context to make to say a lot of straight up genocidal things, and even people who are understanding of the issue, I've seen who get that will, because of peer pressure, essentially not call it what it is, but now I think there's less of that now than ever before. I mean, like, look at 9 years ago, Jon Stewart literally had a piece where he was talking about how he couldn't talk about it and like had people yelling at him, and then the very end he's like, well, let's talk about Ukraine instead. And this is 9 years ago, this is like 2014 or something like that, and so, and then they were like, no, so like it's not. So I think that if there is the potential for, if they see that people's rhetoric starts going more towards Palestine, and that they're unable to subvert that, in the way that they were with Ukraine situation, then I think that they can go with it for a long, long time. If it works to divide, if people start being divisive amongst the working class, right? If people start being more pro-Palestine, though, I think they might cut and run to a different issue. You know what I mean? They might put the camera in a different direction, where they think that they can most likely divide people, or get people, or pivot people in a certain way. I think that's probably how. I mean, that's just my own assumption, but yeah, it could go up until the election, and this could be a point in, it would you would have to have one of the major candidates being on a different side of the issue than the other, right? For it to really be.
Yeah, and who is that candidate?
RFK, maybe, I don't know. Like,
oh God, no! Oh God, RFK is basically, you would think that he was Netanyahu's like right hand man.
Oh yeah, and then Netanyahu's in Philadelphia.
Absolutely crazy. RFK honestly probably has the worst stance on this issue, in my opinion. That's me personally. I know I'm going to have Matthew Witt on tomorrow, and he's expressed some support for RFK Jr. in the past. I pushed him on what about his views on Palestine and just his straight Israeli, like, right wing talking points, and he said, yeah, he's weak in that issue, and I mean, he's only proved to be weaker by the minute, RFK. But I had a quick question for you. I don't mean to cut you off, but I had to get this question in.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of test the waters with the audience, because I want to know, what does right wing mean to you? Because you say right wing, I think there's a presumption of what that is. What is right wing and what is left wing? What exactly is that? What are we talking about?
So earlier I was about to say, I think this is almost exactly that question. I almost prefer the Lenin language he used, right? Like, the language he used was backward and forward masses, right? There are certain things to use constitutional language that are inevitable, that are like the humanity of people, right? Social, usually these things are social, civil things, right? Like racism, homophobia, transphobia. These are backward. Like, at the time, of course, he may not have been talking about these particular things, but there are certain things that are, once they've been established in the mind of people, and they understand that this is just something. That people are just human beings, that are not a monolith, that are equally capable of beauty and harm, just like anybody else. That despite the differences in who they love, what they identify as, what skin color they are, and what religion they might be, that I feel like that if you're using these kind of categories to determine your engagement and how laws should affect people based on their sex, gender, whatever, race, whatever, that is backward, right? Like that is backward, and so but back in the day, capitalism was revolutionary compared to monarchism because of the trade routes it broke up, right? So at that moment, it was forward, right? Because it was giving more people more potential for more freedom, right? At that moment, right? So economics and social stuff, right? Not that they're not intrinsically linked because who has power, right? And all these kinds of things. But when I say, but I am certainly on the more progressive, liberal, left wing side when I'm talking about humanity and culture and social justice and these types of things, right? And then I think that we can go into a little bit more of because it starts to become less of a so we can go into control, like how much control government should have, right, in our lives, right? But that kind of gets foggy, right? Because are you talking about the corporate state, a workers' state? These are entirely different forms of government. And so when one person says these things about a corporate state, but then assumes that all states are the same, you know what I mean? Then they can making extremely astute observations about the current state, but also be conflating all states with that, and then see themselves as an anarchist or libertarian or whatever, simply because they don't realize that there's a worker state that may kind of work outside of the arguments that they're making, but that person at that moment is being more forward thinking than they had previously been. They're on a trajectory of saying the corporate state is bad, right? So like, even if they may like, so this is, a lot of it has to do with relative position towards where you were, and so this becomes very difficult to parse. I mean, I would say that my dad is right wing because he wants more. He believes that corporations should have more control because the people who own those corporations clearly have more ability to control money, and that's an important thing. And so he wants people who are fiscally responsible to control the government. This is his assumptions, right? You know what I mean? And that his lack of fiscal responsibility, not in certain segments or because of certain, like Democrats have made it to where people are less fiscally responsible. So, and they've this isn't he doesn't see that. I know he doesn't see it as a race thing. I think he sees it as a cult, like he would say, a cultural thing where, communities have been exploited and treated bad and been given false hopes, essentially, by the Democrats. Which,
well, that's true though.
That's true, right?
And it has nothing to do with right wing or anything. I mean, it's just a fact.
Right, that is the fact. But he will then, point to black on black crimes in Chicago much more. You know what I'm saying? These kind of things. You know what I'm saying? So he has like these. He was also part of this. He was part of a student rights group that was for black rights, right? Like that helped form a black student union. Like he helped to do that in his school. So like I think that, but I would still consider him right wing because his answer to everything is privatization. You know what I mean? His answer to everything. So privatization, right? Like I think that's probably right wing because that started out as fascist, right? That started out as Italy.
Is that because of who he really is, or is that because of the stuff that he consumes?
The stuff he consumes, 100%, 100%, 100%. Because me and him we were having good conversations. Like we were having great conversations here recently about things, about Democrats being, corrupt, about like, if we always stuck to that kind of stuff, and the whole Brunken clock thing of anti-imperialism that sneaks into the right wing talking points right now at this moment. We were having great conversation, and then Israel came up, and I can't even talk to him right now. You know what I mean? I can't even.
Is he still on one side of it?
Yeah. Oh, very much. Yeah. 100%. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that's it. So for me, and it, it's hard because okay, initially right meant for pro monarchy, left meant anti monarchy, essentially, right? And so now I guess I would say that right means pro capitalist and left means anti capitalist. But within that, there are Lenin would say or Stalin, I'm sorry, was said that we need to be with the advanced part of the, maybe it was Lenin, but it was Lenin, yes. We need to be part of the advanced part of the progressive, if you would, part culturally, socially. We need to be there. We can't go back and just do it. We have to understand where the backwards folks are, the level of power that they actually have, and what can scientifically, because it is true, what can scientifically motivate them to see their fellow worker as a fellow worker and not as their enemy. You know what I mean? That's and I don't think that I think that the reason people do is because of the media, right? I don't think that it's like I think that there are people who would or who so it does get a little bit more nuanced than that because there's a lot of people who are fascist who are on the right side of the situation for the wrong reasons, right? Also, you know what I mean? There are people, there are white nationalists and Nazis who are very much against Israel. You know what I mean? But we call so
Oh,
it
okay.
gets,
That point right there is interesting because and this is uncharted territory, honestly. I try to break down these ideas. Like, to me, ideas aren't, I don't want to call them extreme. Ideas are simple ideas, and you can take them any way you want to. I think that's a fear. And I've always told my wife, me and my wife have been together for 13 years, at least in a relationship. We've been married for 5, together for 13. But I always like to say that the truth is in the middle in some of these situations when we talk about very difficult issues. But this is a scary thought to me. You always have these theories, these conspiracy theories about, and the fascists do use this whole thing with Israel as a talking point. Like the Klan has done this, like very anti-Jewish, anti-black. Um, but where does that conspiracy theory come from? Is there validity to the conspiracy theory, even if it's from this group of people? Because at some point, it's like we both acknowledge that there's a deep state. Somebody has to be a part of it. Can two things be right at the same time, but then you separate the two? Because honestly, is it wrong because of who's saying it, or is it just wrong just because it's wrong? That's the scary part, and I feel like that like you said, there's a lot of people who normally wouldn't be on the same side with me on some issues, but for some reason they're on. I think that they have a better perspective on this particular issue than, and I don't know why that is. Is it because they're simply fascist, or is it because there's validity to what they're saying, but they put so much energy into that one thing, and they are hateful towards a group of people. Like that's what it is. I'm trying to explore this myself because it's a scary thing to navigate without being labeled something, because labels are powerful. Once you get labeled something, it's hard to take that label off of you.
yeah. And I think so. I think that okay. So for instance, the there's this anti-communism memorial, right? Foundation, right? And they've uh, there was a they really promote Ukrainian nationalism, right? Like they've given like a lot of money to Ukrainian nationalists. And it's just now coming out, right? And so this is essentially a lot of times when things aren't explicitly there's a lot of people who I feel like on a lot of stuff. If you go into the fascist spaces, which I used to do to infiltrate, right, you'll see a lot of different takes on a lot of different issues. It'll just be based on what people think is the best thing for the white race, right? You see what I'm saying, at that moment in time. So you might see some pushback in different places and different things. You might see some people who are pro-Israel on the fascist side because they see Jews as white people, right? Those specific Jews as white people, right? And like because it's not a monolith even in that, right? It's you're gonna have all these weird fucking, crazy. I mean, like, these are fascists. Like, these are, you're gonna have weird people who are obviously not fitting in with society, who don't care, who they isolate, who don't even within their own circles, right? They'll say, you'll see a million different opinions and a million different views. It's not one cohesive, screen. It's there are figures who try to do that, but a lot of times those people end up being, you find out they're paid informants by the FBI, and like the guy who led the Proud Boys, right? And so it's this is I think that when we look at an issue like this, it's not about ideology for them as much as it is about what is in, and about them, I mean the corporate state, right? The people who fund all of this stuff, the people in power, right? It's not about ideology. It's about where their interests will lie at that moment, and long-term projection is not generally their strong suit, it would appear, right? I mean, just from the on some levels, yes, but on some levels, no, clearly, otherwise it's like over a long enough period of time, accident is no accident, right? If it's just collateral damage, right? It's just something that you say, okay, that is a price of doing business, essentially, right? For instance, I'm a wrestler, right? And so my back hurts every Monday to about Wednesday, right? From Sunday to about Wednesday after I've wrestled or trained or whatever and taken bumps and stuff like that, my back's gonna hurt. That is not that is a feature of the situation, right? That is a thing that happens because I do this, right? And in the same way, if the continual situation continues to be the deaths of a lot of people, and yet the money keeps coming in and stabilized, and it's going to work, then you've decided the deaths of those people are the price of doing business, and or the destruction of the environment, whatever it might be, whatever the externality of it. That's what they call it. That's what I think that fascists generally, the ones that are disorganized here in the U.S., right? Like the ones that are kind of slightly organized, they might have League of the South, or they have this cult here and this cult here, and their takes on things are as much, they don't have a cohesive. It's very malleable, right? It's because it's based on power. It's based on who their demagogue is. You know what I mean? Who their specific person that they're trying to see gain some form of power. And when it was Trump, they were more in lockstep with the rest of the right. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways. And you would hear Richard Spencer say things that would be more, that would be a little bit more off the chart, but he was a leader, right? He could say things that were, he was trying to lead people in a certain direction. You might see Matthew Heimbach say things, but the people who were the people who were trying to like hide that they were Nazis, they would oftentimes just be Federalists, nationalists, Republican, right? They would just stay in those circles. So that being said, now it seems like a lot of the fascists have gone into the liberal and Democrat circles, right?
I was just going to say that the Matthew guy you mentioned was at the end of the damn wars rally last year, and he was talking to the News to Share reporter and was saying, and shout out to Fort Fisher, by the way, News to Share do great work. Basically has the camera set up, and you can watch all these various protests around the world, domestic and international. But the Matthew, what's his name that you mentioned?
Matthew Heimbach, yeah.
He was at the rally and he had a Marxist Lenin. He was talking about he's a Marxist Leninist now.
Well, so that okay. So I will, okay. So okay, this is a story. You want to? This is I have okay. So I have engagement with Matthew Heimer.
I know you do. That's
So I don't know how much I've told you about this in the past, but essentially, I was at a demonstration against Richard Spencer, and maybe I had been against Matthew Heimbach at a few different demonstrations. I had doxed him. At one point, me and Daryl Lamont Jenkins, at the very first Amron I had ever been to, the American Renaissance Conference, um, I he and I, sorry, I had to put my phone in real quick. Sorry about that. He and I, we went into the building where they were having their meeting, and we sat and kind of trolled Matthew Heimbach a little bit there, right? We just like, joked at him basically, you know, like just said the things we would say online, the jokes we make about fascists to his face, you know what I mean? We kind of just sit there and like, and we recorded it, I imagine Daryl still has that recording, and I was new to all this. I didn't understand, like, it's hard to pin them down because they, like I said, they're very malleable in their engagement, right? That they engage based on what the situation needs, which is what communists need to do in a certain way, right? But for the proletariat, for the cause of, being able to move the backward masses forward and not alienate them, right, entirely. Whereas that's what the liberals seem to do is like just alienate the backward masses. We should just kill them all. And it's like, well, those folks are just ripe for class consciousness because of the situation they're in, but they're also ripe for fascism because of the situation they're in. You know what I mean? So it's a battle. You know what I mean? And if liberals just like fuck them, and then they see the communists and fascists both like trying to engage with them, they might assume that they're similar because they're actually trying to engage with the backward masses, in some way or another, and facilitate a strategy for how to move them. You know what I mean? And if they can't move them, to at least get them in a position where they're on the picket line. You know what I mean? And so I think that's where a lot of the red brown theory, horseshoe theory stuff from the liberals comes from, is that they have effectively just because of the potential for the working class to be in certain areas to be a victim of fascist propaganda. They have ceded that territory to the fascists and the right wing and the Republicans, and and so it's and so that's what a lot of people are really wanting to do, is to really try to change that. And I think that, can you repeat what you just asked? Because I want to.
Yeah, I was talking about Matthew Heimbach and just how he's changed. But guys, there's so much going on with this conversation because the whole thing about the thing that I struggle with though the most is you have to understand I'm around liberal-minded people most of the time. But from my perspective and position in the world and just everything I've learned, and that's probably one reason why I'm not in academia right now. One reason why I'm not in academia right now, I was telling a friend the other day, is because I have a suffocating feeling when I'm around liberals now more than ever. It's not a good suffocation. It's a hypocritical suffocation. Are we assuming too much when we say that liberals are not backwards too? Because the whole backwards and forwards thing, I have questions about it because I don't know how forward liberals really are if you analyze it. Because if you take serious like issues, I mean, if you take this issue here, the Gaza issue, a lot of liberals are totally on board with funding Israel more money. They're totally on board with it. These liberals don't want to fight for black people. They don't think that black people deserve reparations, descendants of slaves. So I delve into all these deeper issues, and I say to myself, how are they really for it? You think, like, are they really for it, or is this more of a is it more of a mentality where we agree on basic equality? But I honestly believe that most people are at the point that they are because of the way times have progressed. I think, and we talked about this the last episode we did one together, episode 51, I think it was, where we wouldn't even be talking, me and you, if this is a testament that times have changed. The fact that me and you are talking together, this couldn't have happened 50 years ago, probably. It definitely wouldn't have happened in the 60s, the early 60s. I mean, there was no integration like across the board. And so I just, if the same white liberals, for example, are benefiting from the integration, like the white conservatives or anyone else is, how can those people give statements like that and say that they're the righteous ones, and everyone else that doesn't follow that line of thought are not the righteous ones? Like, how do they have that kind of like power to say that, I guess?
Since Lenin, things have certainly progressed in the way that capitalist realism and false consciousness, the way that they've been able to adapt to the more, for lack of a better term, people who are aware of the genocidal nature of the American machine, right? Like, how we react to that knowledge, right? There's a lot of people, and some of them are still backward in their understanding of how to react to that. Like, so, okay, like the worst of them realize it and think it's good, right? That's the worst, and that's like the fascists, right? They're the people who realize what America is, and it's good, except when it's to white people, you know. And so, and Irish people and Italian people, to them, are barely white. You know what I mean? And so like whiteness is essentially WASP, you know, like what, like it's a very specific, and there's people who are less white. Like it's like a very weird fucking thing. You know, they're very cultish about it. They're very analytical about it. And it's gross and it's weird. And like they talk about things that are both insidiously dangerous, but also to anybody else who's not into that kind of shit, extremely boring, right? Like, I mean, and I don't mean that in like it's just like a 2% this and 0.2% this, you know, like so.
But
like,
see, how effective is that? Because they're not even, because I don't think that the people that we interact aren't even operating under, or maybe they are operating under these things that people are less white, more white. Like, you think people are still doing that?
It's a small percentage. It's a small percentage of people. It's like, it's such a, okay, so that's the worst, right? That's like the worst, but it's a very small percentage. The next thing is like, yes, these things are bad, but if we just love each other enough and keep voting, then they'll get better, right? It's like, all right, like, you know, like you're not. Okay, so if we want to like really like narrow that down and like dissect it, like it's some form of political action and individual realignment with how you behave towards other people is their answer, right? And that's not wrong, right? Those are two things that you have control over, that you have agency over, that you can do. But it's just, again, the forces that have so, they saw that and they were like, oh, those two things you can do. Well, no, that's not, we're gonna make that less effective. You know what I mean? And that comes in the form of assimilation via diversity, right? And so there may become a time, and it would be a wonderful thing, that only 13%, if the prison population numbers were similar to the actual population demographics.
Gotcha.
That would be good. That would be better, right? That would be less racist, certainly, but it would still be a similar system where a large majority of the population is still policed heavily, whereas another part of the situation get away with anything and get away with bombing people and killing people and stuff like that. There'll just be more people of various races, ethnicities, genders, doing the bombings, right? You know what I mean? Allowed into the thing, right, itself, to maintain the machine, you know, and that isn't necessarily substantively, in terms of economic engagement with the rest of the world, in terms of hegemony, in terms of all these other things. It doesn't fundamentally alter the structure, right? It makes it better, You know what I mean? In a real way, yes. Like, you know, for a lot of people, and that's good, right?
How
But
so?
again,
How
it,
so?
well,
How does it make it better? I guess that's
well, okay. So I mean, in this sense that, okay, and I'm always saying this. I'm saying this as a again in a better than fascism, right?
right.
You know what I mean? So like, so the better than straight up fascism. So that and then I think that the next step, you know, the next response to this that still may be backward. Like I'm still talking about the backward elements, right? Um, is that okay, we know this truth, and that means burn the whole thing. None of it possibly at all. No one here has any revolutionary potential. You know what I mean? No one here has any sort of capacity for revolutionary potential. So, because of how bad it is, and this is like defeatism essentially, right? That there's nothing we can do, nihilism, right? And so you have this defeatism, and then the fourth backward would be idealism, right? Where it would be um it would be where you're uh, aware of what the issue is, but rather than looking at the material reality of the situation, you prefigure a solution that's like way off in the future, that's nice and pristine. You know what I mean? And it can make everything, and it won't have anybody, you know, it won't have anything controversial happen, and it'll just be perfect, and there'll be no opposition. And the day after, everything will go smoothly forever, right? And you don't look at the actual material, and then you try to prefigure every action towards this thing,
Mm-hmm.
one day spontaneously erupting into itself, right? And and so I think that another way that we're divided right now is between idealists and materialists, you know. And so so those are and then I think then there's the forward part isn't the liberal, because I don't think we really have the forward are the people, you know, and the advanced. We do have those folks, of course, you know what I mean, like the activists and organizers and things like that, but I don't think it's like a political like this. If I can't, I would love to see PSL and CPUSA and class unity and the Marxist Leninist communist parties unite. I would love to see that. You know what I mean? I think that that could be together if they fought for a position of uniting people behind ending corporate lobbyism, then we can get to when we show that kind of power of the strike, you know, in that moment to the rest of the working class, and we show them what it can do, and it helps give us democracy in a more democracy, at least in a meaningful way. Then we can then that next step would be to do that same thing with the media, to do that same thing with um, production, you know, and people would get it. And in that moment, that scientific that's the I don't that scientific progress, right? That progress from realizing we have class consciousness. But again, even that has been they see it in Taft-Hartley, right? They see that that could possibly happen, so they created laws to prevent that from happening, and then they gave us something. One of the biggest things they ever gave us, which was FDR's um, a New Deal, right? And that moment was the same time that Taft-Hartley and these things were happening. They were giving us this thing that was um, meant to be. Uh, uh, it was a Keynesian alternative to socialism, right? And so was it forward, right? Like I mean, for real people in their real lives, yes. You know, was it in a certain way not advanced, not the vein that could have been, right? It's like this also gets back into because it's and so real life is so much more. It's hard. These things get very, you know, complex and very like.
Well, see, the thing about it, you're basing the forward based on the 1940s, but yet half the population didn't even have basic human rights.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
so it's like, how can you base the New Deal on anything? I mean, how can we honestly say that Black people didn't benefited from that? They didn't benefit the same way as working class
Right.
white people did,
100%. 100%.
or even
100%.
women. You know, just think
Right.
of women at that time. just the attitudes towards gender at that time, gender roles and property ownership, all types of stuff like that, was still uncharted territory. So I think
Yeah.
anything, I think looking back on it, those types of events like the New Deal get almost this extra enhanced benefit of the doubt because you had the Great Depression, which was a worldwide depression.
Mhm.
And so you have a reaction to the Great Depression with all these social programs and everything. And it's like, what else would have been done realistically? Like, what other option was available? Honestly, like thinking about it, if it wasn't FDR, who else? Whoever else, you don't think that they would have been as clever to do that? I don't know. That's kind of the thing that I think of now, and I believe that that's a bothersome psyche from my standpoint to have because I see people referring back to the civil rights era the same way the 50s and 60s. And I say to myself, is it a good thing that we keep referring back to this time period? Is it a good thing that we keep referring back to the 40s? Like, why do we keep doing this?
So I think that it has to do with, okay, so we have, if we look at like Black Reconstruction, right, and then we see the crushing of Black Wall Street. We see the situation wherein after the New Deal, like you said, people were quite aware that it was for some people and not for others. And if they would have had communism, there would have been, for all working class people, right? We see in socialist countries where women were given much more rights, and even in Afghanistan in 1919, women had the right to vote before women in the U.S. And that was white women, right? Only, right? Like that time. So, yeah, if there would have been that was part of it, right? Like this was like the division of working class people, and then giving a certain amount of people something led to the material reality of people standing up and saying, "Hey, we deserve to be legally recognized and have laws that are for us." And that in these moments of material recognition that's not enough, right? By the thing because that is meant to stop the thing that could be, right? The that can be utilized. It's like Nietzsche said, right? It's his birthday, like last week, right? I like Nietzsche in some ways. I don't in other ways. There's certain things he says that are like, it depends on how you take him, right? If you take him as he's saying, essentially, the capitalist, the way that the few rule over everybody else gives us this diagnosis of nihilism, right? Wherein we will become nihilist by the factor, as opposed to nihilism is a prescriptive, like, hey, you should be nihilist. You know what I mean? Like, one of the things he says is there's rocks that are going to come into our way, and we have to we can either step on them and step over them, no matter, or we can they can like be a barrier to us, right? And in that moment, people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and a whole bunch of Coretta Scott King and so many others, um, stood up and stepped over barriers that and they had been a long time coming. You know what I mean? It'd been a long line of people who have been doing that for a long time, and that extends to today with everything that's happening. So I think that when we look at it from a what are we wanting to see happen today, and how are we going to push in a different direction before like even some sort of liberal comes in to essentially say, oh, here's the thing you wanted, but it's not for everybody. You know what I mean? It I think that when we're looking at like the forward and backwardness of things, right? Or like if in those kind of terms, in those terms specifically, um, it's not whole. It's sadly not always. This is where liberals are always like half. It's half revolution, dig your own grave, right? Kind of situation. Um, and so it's a it becomes very like for instance, when Stalin asked the German Social Democrats um, to join him against Hitler, before the Molotov-Ribbentrop Act, right? This is before that. It was because he to join them against the Nazis, right? Like he wanted to stop the rise of the situation, and they said no because they thought they could democratically keep him out of power, right? They thought they could democratically keep him, that they had a democratic solution to the problem. You know what I mean? They thought they could deal with it, and Stalin wasn't ready to go. Russia wasn't ready to go to war with Germany yet. They would have lost. They felt like, whether that's true or not, kind of hard to say, right? But that's the way they felt, and so that's why they signed that pact, right? Was because at that moment in time, they didn't have the capacity, and they could have had that capacity if the Social Democrats had decided to join in with them, right? And so this is a long time problem, right? But at the same time, it's like it's hard because if, let's say, instead of Reaganomics, let's say it had been reversed. Let's say the answer to, let's say that like somebody conservative had been in power at that time and was under the, was like very pro-libertarian, you know what I mean? And was like, oh no, let's go with like neoliberal hardcore line politics at that moment in time. And then let's say in the 80s, we would have gotten the New Deal, right? And then we still would have had the same events that occurred. Like, what would have that, what would have changed in terms of like it? Okay, if we did have the sort of cultural awakening and the sort of like re-understanding of his history that we've had, but more people had material means to do things with, would we have more capacity for people to be able to do the kinds of things we need to be done to get to communism right now? Would
That's
people?
a good question.
And that's I guess where it's like, I know and this is going to be a kind of a, there's people who say they don't want to take food stamps even when they need it because they don't want to take something that somebody else may need more, or because they feel like they don't want to take from the government, under some sort of principle, right? Like it's a principle, it's an ideal, or misunderstanding of material, reality, in a certain way, right? And like, but if their friend invited them over for brunch and they had like a big old thing laid out, you know what I mean? They had like 4 or 5 of their friends and mimosas and stuff like that, and they spent $400 on that. You know what I mean? And they spent $400 working, and let's say like, but they like their friends were maybe a little more bougie than them, but they like really wanted to do that. They would totally go, right? And they don't really understand that like that's actually taking more from the people they don't want to take from than they really, you know what I'm saying? Like it's and so it's like there's things that happen sometimes, and it's like even if they're not, it's like we have so little agency over the things that are happening in this time, until we collectivize, that it's like we just have to utilize. So that goes back to your question of what is going to happen with the narrative here, and it's like, how do we get this narrative to be something that helps to prevent further deaths, right? The further, helps people to helps to distance, the American war machine, like from something that the American people want to be in favor of, like the entire apparatus. G4S built the wall in Israel. It built the wall it built the wall in Mexico, U.S. border. It builds the wall. It builds the jails, private prisons. You know, it's like these companies, you know, these corporations, these. How do we get people to understand the material, like, and to see ourselves in the Palestinians, right? To see in what ways we can learn from the resistance forces as they go up against a beast, a monolith that has insurmountable power comparatively, right? You know what
I
I mean?
can answer that question that you just said there. The reason why we can't sympathize is because, and I hate to speak for us. I mean, but we live in the country, but I just think that the mentality of this country overall is, for some reason, countries are supposed to be measured to our ideal, whatever that is.
Yeah.
It just proves that we're disconnected with the world. It proves that we see our country as more important and valuable and powerful than the rest of the world, um, which in turn translates into, does that mean that you're saying that the citizens here are more informed and smarter than the citizens of other countries? So even though it's complete lies, it doesn't matter, because as long as you adhere to the ideal, you just think that this side, the grass is green on this side. It's a very ugly, simplistic way of looking at things, but I think the monolingualism in the country is a reflection of that. People in this country have very little interest in learning about different cultures, different languages. You go to Europe and people speak on average 3 different languages. And I don't even think it's just proximity. I think it's a mentality, because there's plenty of people that I know in Asia and Africa that can speak English fine, but I don't see people here speaking African languages and Asian languages, Asiatic languages. So I think it's definitely a mindset. It's a reflection of our poor education system. Uh, and so if you have a terrible educational base, then that's only going to brew more ignorance. And I think culturally speaking, this is definitely the most ignorant society in the industrialized world. Uh, I shouldn't even say industrialized world, just in the Western world, I'll say that much. Because every country has industry. So I'll just say the Western world, and that seems simple, but I think it's something to be said. Randy Delaney put this stat up. Randy Delaney, shout out to Randy, is running for mayor of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he was on the forum and he talked about how I think it's 54% of the country has a readability level of 6th grade and lower. So that means people who are thumping the Bible in your face on Sundays. I mean, this is a free thinkers forum. I can't assume that people think that I'm not Christian or whatever. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't know if I've said that before on the forum, but I mean, I'm a free thinker, but I'm an atheist. And I just say that, you can believe what you want to believe, and that's fine with me. But, but you should, at least, if you're going to pick up a book written by people, inspired by some invisible person in the sky, you should at least know how to read it. And the fact that 54% of the people, most people can't read the Bible. They can't contextualize what the Bible is. So how can you understand something when you don't even have the comprehension level to even interpret it? And that's what we're dealing with. And so on the geopolitical scale, the level of ignorance here is like you can't even put it in words almost how ignorant people are here. They can't point to Ukraine on the map. Poll 100 Americans randomly and see if they can point to Ukraine on the map.
Right. And I think you just made such a great point, in terms of, I think that you actually made a point that would really appeal to the Christian left, that could be utilized. Is there's thing in the Bible, and it says, of course, back then most people could not read. I mean, like, obviously, and how can they learn? How can they hear without a preacher, right? Like, there's this line, right? And so, interestingly, if reading if understanding, if learning is an important part, and if this okay, like, I'm making a lot of assumptions. I'm agnostic, so I'm just using these assumptions that Christians have. And this is the inherent word of God, and God decided to use language of man of humans to put into a book in and we have like Greek, Hebrew, Latin, translations that are all have unique elements that we probably all need to read. It would seem like this goes back to all what you're saying, that the Christian view should be then that we must have a well-educated group of people who can speak multiple languages and have high reading comprehension skills, because that's the only way they're going to be able to understand the Bible. Right? Like you would think that like they would be for the most pro-education people on the planet, but when you realize and you understand it and you do study the Bible, you realize there's a whole lot of anti-colonial stuff in there. Isaiah 10 and Isaiah and James 5, for instance, are like about woe to those who make decrees against poor people, woe to those who exploit poor people, and he says brethren right after that. And if you look at it, he's talking to the rich people, and then he's talking to brethren. He says, don't grumble amongst each other, meaning you have a bigger enemy. Like, like these are things that are being said, and if you really can look at it and look at all of it in context, you're seeing a proto-social society, the guidelines for a proto-social society, followed by what to do if you're under captivity and occupation. Like a guideline for how to deal with and get out of that, all in one, right? Tactics, right? That did not work, by the way, historically. They held Rome for 3 years, and then they were crushed, right? Like, so just tactically, strategically, it did not work. And so now this is a thing taken from many different beautiful traditions that are all have some really deep meanings that can be very useful, philosophically and serenely. I mean, so do breathing slowly and these kinds of things that we learn from other religions. There's so much to learn from religion and still be secular, in my opinion, right? There's so much that's we didn't know until later on that maybe now we have other sources for, that people got in touch with and tuned with way earlier, like sonar, essentially, or like ultrasound. I mean, the ability to go and kind of feel your body and vibrate and stuff like that, and go, oh, okay, something might be happening over here. That's yeah, it's fucking brilliant. And that came from religion and magic and all these things are proto-science. That's what it was. It was science before there was science. It was trying to understand the world with only. Yeah, and it's also art, because a lot of it is, okay, we know the world doesn't exactly work like this, but this is, I'm going to use the language of when we did, and I'm going to make an artistic point, because that's the only way people will listen at this moment in time. So, for instance, the Abraham Isaac story. If you just came and said, wait, we should stop doing human sacrifice, they'd be like, well, everybody does human sacrifice. Why would we stop? Oh, God told me. When? Well, I would have to go kill my kid, that's what one does. And and he said no, and he gave me a sheep instead. Oh, so we should kill sheep instead? Yeah, I guess. And, what I mean? So these things are progressing in a certain way, and then you look at what Jesus was talking about. He's saying if someone hits you with your right hand, let them hit your left hand also. And to someone who's not familiar with the culture, they won't know what the left hand signifies. That the people wipe with their left hand, that is that it is unclean hands. And so when someone does a crime against you, and that was actually considered punishable by death. So it's almost a way of saying, if someone does a crime against you, let them do an unholiness act against you, and let people see that, or if someone tells you to walk with them 1 mile, get them to walk you 2. Well, where he was is important in that moment. He's in the temple, and that's 2 miles from Rome. And so and it was illegal for a Roman centurion to have a Jewish proletariat, Jewish person, sort of whatever you want to call it at the time, walking with them, carrying their bags into Rome. It was illegal to make someone naked. So if someone takes your cloak, give them your robe also. These are ways of civil disobedience. You know what I mean? And so people don't know the language, they don't know the time, they don't know the cultural, historical significance of the Saqqara and all these different groups and zealots and whatever. That there's not going to be understanding. And so, and you can easily just say things like that. I mean, you know, my dad's not a, he's Church of Christ. So they don't believe in the premillennialism or postmillennialism, whatever he doesn't believe that. He believes the revelation is more about back then, which it certainly is, you know, than it is about now. So he's not an evangelical in the sense of like pro-Zionist, um, uh, in the sense, I mean, he's pro-Zionist in effect, but not in like belief that, which is a weird belief for Christian Zionists, right? Because like you want to protect the Jews so that Jesus will kill them all. Like, what, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? Like he's giving him one last chance. No, I'm real. All right, okay. But and like, I guess at that point nobody's gonna say no, right? Like, oh, there he is floating. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so like, like, I mean, I guess like some Christians will be surprised that he's not white, but like, they'll you know they'll just be you know, other than that, so I mean, but I'm you know, I'm joking there. But like, I think that it's interesting that people, and like the whole thing was a way for, I mean, Israel was formed so that the Western powers would have control in the Middle East. You know what I mean? That's the reality of it. They weren't just like, yeah, let's give Jewish people a safe place to live. That's not like, I'm sure that's what a lot of the original, you know, well-meaning people who were Zionists wanted. You know what I mean? That's where, you know, but you're more likely, like, it's also not the safest, it's not the safest place in the world for Jews by any means, you know? And so that's like, it doesn't really work the way it's supposed to work, you know? It hasn't made Jewish people safer. You know, every time you see Gaza get bombed, you also see a string of anti-Semitic hate crimes. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not, you know, obviously that's not a good response. Or at least that's a horrible response. Obviously that's really fucked up, and to blame American people for something the Israeli government did is, you know, that's where it starts to get anti-Semitic. When you say the Jews are controlling the world, or that Israel controls the U.S., as if Israel ever stepped outside of the U.S.'s. We've seen what happens when Israel steps outside the U.S. is that we blow up one of their ships to pretend like it didn't happen. Like, like, you know what I'm saying? If Israel goes off of what the U.S. wants in any sort of way whatsoever, you know what I mean? It's not. It's the other way around. You know what I mean? That's where you get. That's where the fascists come from, though, is that they'll come from a place of the Jews are controlling the world. It's a Zionist lobby. Even if it becomes mystical. Like the Jews have some sort of like mystical powers, and even if you got rid of corporate lobbyism, that they would like be able to like mystic control. You know, it makes no sense whatsoever. You know what I mean? It doesn't. Yeah, it's very.
I think I'm more of I would be labeled more, and it says it on my title. I would be viewed more as a conspiracy theorist than you. I think that there is some validity to that. Things just they can't keep connecting and not make sense or whatever. Israel obviously has a relationship with the U.S. that is way beyond just media connections, and there's a lot going on. And I think you'd had to dedicate like a whole season of podcast just to understand, scratch the bottom of the surface.
Oh yeah.
But it's just in government, banking, and all these different. There's just a lot going on. It's complicated, and ultimately, we don't like to focus on one particular issue, or series of issues related around this whole conflict between Palestine and Israel. But it I think that's why it is. It's like Ben said, a gap for us said, episode 3. This situation between Gaza and Israel is not meant to be resolved because it just benefits too many profiteers. It benefits too many people involved. And there's a lot that I want to say about it, but I just can't because we got an hour left. I want to focus on the unions, but we haven't touched about unions at all because we went to talking about everything else. And but we will revisit this question later about this whole idea of this the Zionist lobby, like that. to me, it's a fascinating thing personally.
Yeah, I'm not saying that doesn't exist per se. I guess what I mean is that there's a lot of people around the world with a lot of different interests, and the people that have control and power, it's multipolar already. It's like a pluralism already. But even more so now with BRICS and with all this stuff, there's a multipolar. That I just don't think that. Yes, effectively, Israel and the U.S. and NATO and IMF and the World Bank run this shit, right? Like that's like But I don't think it's. I think where the fascists start like coming, but not where their shit is that there's some sort of mystical power that the Jews have that has allowed them to. Their whole race somehow controls. You know what I mean? It's a racial thing. It's because or something. You know what I mean? And so
that's very true.
I think that's more of the element that they bring into it, and that's like where it becomes. So that's where it can, like, the capitalists are the Jews, right? That's what they say basically is that and that's they were, so that's where it did somewhat. They would use certain tendencies, and that's where they're slippery. You know what I mean? They can slip into the Democrats, they can slip into the Republicans, they can slip. It's America is a fascist state, Israel is a fascist state. These are France is a fascist, in a lot of ways. Germany, like these are all still have elements of fascism. You know what I mean? But they're not. But the whole thing is kind of, you know what I mean? It's like this kind of new techno feudalism, whatever you want to call it. There's certain powers that are certainly, but yeah, I think labor is the thing that's going to kind of segue. Labor is the only thing that's going to break this hold, and it's the thing that brings us all together, to past all of these things, and it will be what is the penultimate. Once the consciousness about that has been risen to its penultimate degree, there can't help but be radical redistributions of power that Martin Luther King called for.
Yeah, I definitely get the mysticism component of that, but I guess I'm speaking more so now to people who aren't saying it in a mystical way. They're saying it based on an analysis, a geopolitical analysis, based on the military-industrial complex, the need for the Western world to keep itself together before it collapses. Like, you have a lot of people analyzing from that standpoint, and somehow that's labeled anti-Semitic the same way that's labeled anti-Semitic.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But as far as the labor aspect is concerned, you said something earlier that I think is a great transition. You talked about the Communist Party USA, the Greens, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. You have all these different left-wing factions, left-wing parties. So the big question is, why haven't these groups band together more? And I honestly believe that it goes to the union question. I asked you the last episode we did, 51, and I encourage my audience to go back and watch the episode 51 because we talked about union activity and labor movements in that episode. I think every time I've had Jay on, we've talked about labor in some way, shape, or form. But I believe that the only way that if unionization is going to be effective to optimal levels, I think that there has to be a divorce between the Democratic Party overall and the unions, because I think that's what's holding people back. I think that's what's holding labor back, because in all these situations, the Democratic Party is the litmus test. Whether it's the Communist Party USA, people who may not know shit about politics will automatically lump the Democrats in with all those groups that they don't really have anything in common besides the I guess the cultural facades. Like, Democrats are pro LGBTQ, Democrats are pro Black, Democrats, the same bullshit messaging that they've gotten the benefit of, because the Blacks vote for Democrats, the Jewish people vote for Democrats, the gays vote for Democrats. I mean, they use all this shit as a way to sort of, I guess, justify we must be doing something right if all these different downtrodden groups of people keep supporting us. We must be the party of the people because 80% of Black people support us. So we must be the working class party because we still get the support from all the unions. But that's a dangerous thing too, because I believe that's held the progress from all these outside political parties and the unions. What do you think about that? Like, what is it going to take?
Well, 100%. I think that's the. I mean, I think that we have to. You know, I do believe these candidates either have bots or they got a lot of people who almost every time you criticize somebody in any way that gets any sort of traction, like if you criticize Biden about labor in any sort of way that gets like, you know, viral or whatever, you're going to have a bunch of people coming out and being like, he stood with the UAW people. And it's like, that's symbolic. Like, that's like total. That's what Martin Luther King talked about in Letters from Birmingham Jail, Letters to White Liberal. Like, this is purely symbolic. Like, that's all he did. But we got to push back and like talk about the reality of the strike with the railway union that right before that led to the East Palestine situation. And it's just very interesting because, like, you know, you'll have a whole bunch of people come out and it was about sick days. He just didn't want the railways to stop because of sick days or something like that. You know, they'll make some sort of no Rosa kennel.
Sorry. Didn't the union workers want? Didn't they want 19 like 6 days and they only got one from the deal?
Yeah, basically. And then they showed it was a big win and all this stuff. Joe Biden negotiated a big win, and it was like people needed to be able to rest and people need to be able. And there were so many things that they were demanding initially. Like there was a lot of different things that were like, you know, they wanted inspection of certain things. There was, you know, but yeah, they and so to call. It's weird to me, and I don't know if I said this on the show before, but like we've done. There's people who have like very little power who may have very bad opinions, and then there's people who sign crime bills and say if you don't vote for me, you're not Black, and like that feels like a big distinction in power, and yet, you know, the one person, you know, gets like a whole bunch of that person is definitely a bad actor. That person definitely, and they are, you know what I mean? Like it's not good to be hateful and you know what I mean? But they don't have the power to do the things Joe Biden can do and then pretend like he's the pro-labor candidate and pretend like he's the, you know, pro-Black candidate. And so that's how I think that the center, if you will, has kind of you know, ratcheted, you know, and contained any sort of. But I really do feel like there is a, you know, there's more and more unionization, you know, than ever before. The NLRB is doing some pretty cool things. In, you know, right now they made it to where you can basically get a union if people try to stop you from forming a union. You know, there's some pretty cool new stuff. That's all because of people finally realizing they're becoming class conscious and communism not being so scary anymore. So as much as we can criticize Bernie Sanders on a lot of levels, you know what I mean? The fact that he played the role of getting socialism out, the word socialism not being a scary word anymore, is something powerful and good. And so it's, you know, if we use it, you know, and so it's, you know, there's a certain amount that we control the means of production of media more so than we did before, right? Now it's still a drop in the bucket compared to, like, okay, for instance, when you had 3 channels, that was what people knew, right? Now you have thousands of channels, and you may be speaking to, you know, a few people, but the thing is that there's more and more people saying, when more and more people are speaking the truth, that voice echoes, you know what I mean? And it becomes more and more powerful because it becomes unavoidable. You know what I'm saying? And the more we put ourselves in positions where, that's why, you know, running for office is like, you can, if there's something everybody's staring at and you go and stand in front of it and point in a different direction real quick, you might get a number of heads turned in that other direction, and then people might see something even more interesting over there. You know what I mean? And so that can be, if that's the reason why we might engage with those things. But oftentimes electoralism leads to, is like this kind of like windfall, like this moment of all of our energies coalescing. Whether even some people develop their whole political tendency around, well, I don't vote, which is fine. I'm not saying that's not an understandable response, or even materially fine. But it does still regulate your political thing around a contradiction to a thing, right? Like the contrast of a thing. It's still relegating all of your political energy to one day, to one moment, to a ballot box. And whether you're saying that as a defeatist, like we can't do anything other because so we can't, it doesn't matter, so I won't vote. That's all I can do is not vote. And like as if we already have like 50% people don't vote in some elections. And so if not voting did something, I would be very much for it, right? If not voting made it where nobody became president or something like that, maybe we don't need a president for a while. I'm just kidding. I don't know. But like, it'd be better than whatever the fuck's happening. What, so like, if it actually had some sort of real political ramification, you know what I'm saying? Then yeah, sure, but it doesn't, right? And so doing it in some situations can or cannot, you know what I mean? And so I feel like, but the real thing is we got to stop pointing and pushing ourselves into these prescribed channels that they're laying out for us, because they're not going to lead anywhere. That they've set up anything that they prescribed as an alternative. You got to look at it and go, well, where is that alternative going to lead? Like even the Affordable Care Act, was obviously written by Romney. These kinds of things, like it's just so many people are now waking up to this, and it's I think that there's been just a lot of, since Occupy, since BLM, and now seeing Cop City being built, oftentimes funded and voted on by Democrats, even Black Democrats, that we're seeing that there is something going on beyond the racial essentialism. Is not, monolithization is not a, it's a tactic. It's an idea void of material reality. You know what I mean? It's just the reality is interest in class interest, self-interest. Yes, there are interests that are based on like race, for sure, 100%, in terms of, but only in terms of historical times in a certain situation, not based on some sort of mystical thing that people of certain race have or don't have. You know what I mean? Like, because there's no monolithization, but like, reparations, for instance, or land back do have certain racial, quantities to them, right? Like, so it's like because of the historical situation, and so I think that's another thing that kind of liberals do, is that they have a certain kind of mysticism around a certain kind of essentialism, which becomes a little bit like angelification, right? And that can be, it's like
it's the savior complex.
Yeah.
But what is your opinion? You had favorable remarks about Sean Fain the last episode, the president of the UAW union. I'm going to question a little bit his intentions, because wasn't Sean Fain the one that invited Biden to the picket line in the first place?
So
and why did he do that?
So from what I understand, he had not endorsed Biden. I'm not sure. I don't know if he has or not.
He has endorsed him, but do you not take that as a proto endorsement? I mean, he's inviting the president to the picket line.
Well, it's acting president, right? So if it would have been, he's basically saying, I think that what he was saying was kind of rhetorical when he said it. Was, do you stand with us? And I don't think he meant like literally. You know what I mean? I think he meant like figuratively, in solidarity. Are you going to pass the PRO Act? Are you going to do things that show that you're a pro-labor candidate? Are you going to do those kind of things. But Sean Fain's in a position where he doesn't necessarily want to alienate any part of his base by asking for a very specific legislation from a very specific president, because at the moment that president does do that thing, he's alienating half his base, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, because the workers aren't necessarily Democrats, like by any means, and that's never been the case. A lot of workers are Trump supporters. A lot of union workers are Trump supporters. Like that is, that they just divorce their politics from. Maybe they have geopolitical beliefs, or they have religious beliefs, or they're anti-abortion or some of that nature, but they're pro-union. You know what I mean? There's just a lot of people who don't have a set, handout of like, these are the left beliefs, these are the right beliefs. You know what I mean? They just have a mishmash of like, well, this is my interest. This is in my interest. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the way. It's not like a college campus. It's not like Brooklyn. It's not like Berkeley. You know what I mean? It's just like working class America, and that's another thing, is like a lot of folks who speak for the left don't have any real lived experience with working class people, let alone organizing at all. You know what I mean? And so it's it becomes, or they do have experience organizing, but they don't have any experience organizing in working class spaces. They have way too much experience organizing in places that are just like echo chambers.
Exactly.
And so they don't have, and that doesn't mean that they won't have the same views at the end of the day, right? Like they won't still hold the same positions. It just means that they'll be able to move within circles in ways that cultivate growth towards progressive ideas. You know what I mean? As opposed to alienating themselves because they have those ideas, right? And like the only way you can do that is by learning what people care about, learning what people need on an individual basis, right? Because everybody's different, and what wins over one person towards the idea won't win somebody else over. Somebody could be right there and be like, well, my job pays me pretty fucking well. I get paid like $25 an hour to do this kind of work, and so even if like I am pro union, but I don't necessarily see I need a union in my job, and that's a different place to start from than somebody who's just like totally anti-union and really needs one, because like that person, you might have to be more of like like you might have to sell them on the idea that we're going to need a large scale strike at some point to be able to make a demand, to end corporate lobbyism for any legislation any of us want to get passed. That might be one of the things I might say to that person. But like you got to look at where people are individually in any given situation. And so Sean Fain said that, I think that he was just saying he's invited active president to actually do something about it, and Biden decided in lieu of actually doing something about it, he would show up. I think he probably did invite the acting president, but I don't think it was in a sense of like, I'm endorsing you. I think it was more in a sense of I'm challenging you to be here and to do something about it, and and if you don't do anything about it, you're going to show your hypocrisy, But you bring the active president somewhere, you get attention on the issue. You know what I mean? You get attention on the thing that you're doing.
But isn't it safe to say that because the United Farms workers have already endorsed Biden, Bernie's already endorsed Biden, pretty much all the rank and file people, which I think I'm going to stop. Like I said, people know how I see the Democratic Party. There's no hope in the Democratic Party as far as I'm concerned. This rank and file shit, like AOC is the same as whatever your favorite Democrat is, whoever it is. I think this ship was sailed a long time ago. Like actions have to count for something. I mean, they all funded the Iron Dome and all these other projects, the Willow Project, all this shit. I mean, under Biden's watch. So it's like, I understand that these people like AOC and Rashida Tlaib were just a handful of people within the Democratic Party. But at the same time, it's like, it just seems like that the establishment has all the control over these fringe sectors of the Democratic Party, if you want to call them the pushers and the shakers of the party, which I don't know. I mean, I just don't know if they're effective personally. Medea Benjamin was on, I believe it was episode 47 from Code Pink, and she seemed to suggest that if we had 100 Bernie Sanders in office, that there would be substantial changes in society. And I question that even not, because you're basically presupposing then that the Democratic Party can change. And I don't believe that it can be changed right now, as long as you have all the money coming in and all the financial incentive for these people to come in broke as a joke, and then they end up multimillionaires. All these motherfuckers do, like it's in Congress. They're inside trading stocks and they're doing all this and that. And it's like, and I think it's just like we got to really start holding these people accountable. Like they're supposed to be our servants. They're supposed to be representing the people and not their own personal interests in the lobby groups. But it seems like they have other interests and their hands are tied with other people. But I guess what I was getting at was the Biden thing is interesting because the UAW president would have to know, of the union would have to know, that this was the first time in history that a president was at the picket like this. And it got positive news, like people that normally wouldn't even be like, oh my gosh, that he really did that. And then Ilhan Omar and all these people are saying, look at the president, look at what he did. He stood with the workers. So regardless of Sean Fain not endorsing him, but not to me, I think it's an indirect endorsement because he's still going to get credit for the political moment for being the first president to be at the picket line. Yeah. And it's like, was that even necessary? Yeah. You know, to have that done, you know, like that, to where, and then Trump is in the same state at the time. And apparently, you know, he had pissed off a lot of the union workers and some of the leadership. And so Sean Fain was basically like, fuck you, like you don't need to be here. And that kind of explained why Trump wasn't invited.
Damn. Okay, so that does show. And like I guess, you know, I would say, you know, it's kind of hard. You know, that's a hard one, but it would have been interesting to have both of them there. But at the same time, you know, and it just sucks because everything is a ping pong match, right? Every fucking thing, every fucking this, they make it into that. They put themselves into situations where they had nothing to do with it. Obama halted the pipeline. No, the fucking people who stood out there and got water hose that you called the fucking feds in on stopped the pipeline. You know what I mean? Yeah, you might have called it at the end. You know what I mean? But that's like saying the referee won the football game. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, like, oh my God, it's I don't know. It's that's all. That's it's hard to. Okay, so this is, you know, this is maybe a self-critic of mine. Like back in the day, I was asked to be on a bunch of, you know, major news media for doing, you know, because of my anti-fascist engagement and stuff like that. And I tried my best to avoid, like, to, you know, to prop myself for talking points of like, you know, diversity of tactics, you know what I'm saying, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was ready for those kinds of things when they would say those kinds of things, or whenever they would talk about, and like, you know, I would talk about how I thought that, you know, Obama was an imperialist president, you know, and you know, he made me cry when he spoke, and then I really believed in him, and I really hoped for a communist Muslim president, but I did not get it. And, Fox News like sold him to me. I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, communist Muslim president. Oh shit, but
that's funny.
But no, but like, you know, I really had like, you know, and so like I had been really, that was my political awakening, was, you know, seeing that, and then the Occupy to Occupy, you know, was like really, you know, build up more. But I think there's people who are realizing that, but they just always, when there's a big segment of Facebook that when you criticize Democrats, they still think you're praising the Republicans in some form or fashion, right?
Because they're operating under that system.
And that's what we've got to kind of like, it's almost like whenever I try to talk to somebody, I almost try to avoid the duopoly until it comes up. And then I initially critique whoever they critique first, right? Because like, okay, yeah, you critique the Republicans, I'll critique the Republicans too. That way we're on the same page here. You critique the Democrats, I'll critique Democrats too. Okay, we're on the same page here. And then inevitably they're going to talk about a form of legislation that they want. like inevitably, that if this just happened in some way or another, and then that I immediately just say, well, that can't happen because corporate lobbyism makes it to where, according to a Princeton study, 90% of legislation is for 1% of the population, and the remaining 9% or 10% is for like the upper 90%, is that top 10. So none of like, it's what I like, what you like, what we want is kind of irrelevant unless we did something about that. And the only thing we can really do about that, the only power we really have that they don't have, is our labor. It built everything around us, and everything you see couldn't have been built without labor. You couldn't have managed a brick into place. You can't. And so like, if we withhold that labor from them, we can make a demand to end that corporate lobbyism and to get / restore whatever they, get democracy, more democracy, and that, like, obviously that is not the final step. Obviously the media and the production itself have to be in many industries nationalized. There's much more to it to achieve a worker state. That is the first step at crushing the bourgeois state, right? So if you want to crush the bourgeois state, if you are a activist who wants to crush the bourgeois state, the only power we have is not, I mean, you can stand up in the streets and that's important, but the real power is going to be at the picket line. You can go to the ballot box, that's fine, but the real power is going to be at the moment when people who are already striking understand striking as a political tactic beyond just their individual workplace. And so when they see that, and I think they will, if the UAW workers get their way, we could see hours go down to 32 hours full time, right? That could be a real change, and people can see that across industry. It'll be an industrial change. They'll go a multi-industrial change. But the more people realize the power that people have, eventually they'll realize that the law, and the more people realize that the law is not always the moral arbiter of society. You know what I mean? And that's in every fucking movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's, that we can realize that, yes, it is illegal by Taft-Hartley to do the kind of thing that we would need to do, which is to make a demand by withholding our labor. But it's the only material option we have. And every other revolution we've ever had in the United States has required actions that were not legal, right? I would also tie this back into Gaza. It is legal under the UN Security Council to, for instance, fight back against colonization, like armed fight back, in a situation. So that's, and I think that the global South, especially after making demands to the UN, especially, this isn't just, at the moment when we realize this, there will be pressures put against us, right? But there is a whole group of people because the land rights of indigenous people in America have to do with the border, right? They have to do with immigration. They have to do with because the people who lived here before are the same people who live in Mexico and the southern United States. They never left. They never were. And people who did leave and came back and moved, it was arbitrary. It's arbitrary border, essentially. You know what I mean? It's this meant this whole economic, not to say there's not times in history where borders have been justified for a reason at a given time in order to stop a certain situation at a moment, in a given time, in a war scenario. You need checkpoints, etc. There's like times, I think that sometimes people use something that like was done in a socialist country and to say, well, they had a border, like, okay, well, that's not, but also there's the ideal and there's the now, and you got to move towards things, but I think that we're waking up to the idea that we're getting the actual power we need to have a multinational workers' resistance effort eventually. You know what I mean? I think that there's the seeds there for there to be. I mean, like, okay, if you take like the CPUSA, they have connections to every other communist party, just about. You know what I mean? If you go to their like conventions and stuff, you'll have people from like each communist party of China, Vietnam, both, right? Like in the same place, speaking, having all these people and the people, and like David Rovix is there, like a whole bunch of like, people who are like, you know, American Johnson and Luna Hoy, and they're all connecting in this meeting, right? Space. There's a space there, right? And we have these same people who are going to Cuba, who are going to the Philippines, who are going to different places, where there's struggle and learning, and it's happening, and it's really happening in a way that has probably never before happened in human history, and this is only the burgeoning moment of that, because it's like 20 years since the internet's been around. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like 20, 30 years since the internet's been prevalent in our lives in a major way that it is now, or less than that, really, in the way that it is now. And I really, and at first, maybe we resigned ourselves to it, maybe in a way, but I think eventually it's going to be more of a thing that's more immersed into the world. Just the way technology's moving is more, is more, it's going to be part of the, and I think that as that transition happens technologically, there's a lot of technological innovations that are going to change the way we talk about production, right? Mainly 3D printing and automation, right? Those two are going to have major, huge changes for the way we think about society. And the question for for us is, for people who aren't already Marxist, do we want a small segment of the population controlling all the robots that do all the production, controlling what's built, when, where, why, and to who profits off it? Do we want that? Do we want like a few people, or do we want most people to have some say in the coming, situation of what's built, when, and where? Do you want that technology to serve the people, or do you want the technology to serve the elite? And the Hollywood writers of America sees the means of AI production in the capacity that they now can use AI as a writing prompt or a bot prompt or something like that. You know what I mean? It's a calculator, guys. It's a calculator. That's all it is. The word calculator. It's a linguistic calculator. And so like, it's going to happen. Technology is going to happen. You can't put Pandora back in the box. It's just going to happen. I was a primitivist ELF member, right? So like, this is coming from me. Technology is going to happen, and I'm not anymore, but back in the day, and so you gotta go with it, but at the same time, what we gotta understand is, how are we going to utilize that under our workers? Visualize the fact that inevitably, once people receive the class consciousness, that inevitably there is going to be a moment of, oh, we can just utilize the strike form to reel back control over our government, because the government can only sponsor or suppress that which the people produce, right? Like they only have so much capacity in their actual power without controlled production, but when that controlled production is stripped away from them, removed, they have no power anymore. And so they have to acquiesce to a demand. And in that moment, when people see that, as they see it in small victories, as they see it, that is the pointing to the next thing. And so, because of the dichotomous magnetic structure of the continual, and it's, with my dad for years and years, it was, even when I was an anarchist for 15 years, it was always Democrats, 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 right? And that was the way that it was. And because I would always be like, still kind of critiquing what Trump was doing, right? As fascist or whatever, you know what I mean? Instead of critiquing the whole system, right? And I still was critiquing the whole system, but he just wouldn't believe me and stuff like that. But then once this kind of unholy marriage of populist, anti-imperialist sentiment amongst the right wing for some reason, right, happened, it was like a perfect storm whenever I was becoming Marxist-Leninist, to being like, okay, I can critique Biden a whole bunch in a really positive, even though I was critiquing Obama before, I was critiquing these folks. He would always just position me as a Democrat. And finally, he was seeing me as somebody, but he would still always talk about the Democrats, right? It was still always about like, well, it's not a whole machine. It's just the Democrats. You know what I'm saying? It would always go back to that still. And it still does. That's the major enemy, and so I don't know how many people who feel that way are listening to your show. Probably not. You know what I mean? Maybe.
I just it's a very interesting point because I certainly don't share the politics of your dad, but I agree that I've really believed that the Democrats are a serious. I think they are the problem.
Yeah.
Ultimately for the goals, I think of what me and you maybe are trying to accomplish, because and words matter. The reason why I say this, a significant problem I have with all these groups like the Green Party and the Communist Party USA. You go on their website. I critiqued them the last time we talked about this. Why does it have to be like? Why does it have to be a we're not Republicans type of mentality?
Yeah.
Like, we know you're not fucking Republicans. We know you're not. So why do you have to single out the Trumpers? They're still part of the working class regardless.
Yeah.
So by them doing that, I don't know if they realize you're still giving validity to the Democratic cover, this umbrella, because and something else I saw, we went on a date for our 13th anniversary. My wife and I the other day went to a bookstore I'd never gone to before, and it's the same bullshit. It had banned books on it, and I got super excited when I saw that because, and it's called Ghostlight books, and I thought banned books. I'm thinking, okay, these are books like that you couldn't find like doing when if for instance I researched Cuba. These are books that you can't find, during the revolution in Cuba. These are books that were banned by the Castro government or banned by the Batista government. Or I was thinking on those terms, like banned books to me means like they're banned. And then I go in the fucking bookstore, and I don't mean to curse like this audience, but it just pisses me off. I'm thinking that this is going to be this revolutionary just bookshelf full of books. Fucking Ibram X. Kendi and Robert DiAngelo books are under the banned book section. I'm like, these fuckers are New York bestsellers, New York Times bestsellers. How the fuck are they banned books? Because, and it just goes into that same stupid, the DeSantis Florida stuff.
Yeah.
It's like the Democrat versus Republican thing again. And so I actually put in a request. I said, can you get more Malcolm X books? Just, and I'm not even trying to push the envelope to ban. Like, these motherfuckers know who Malcolm X is. Yeah. I mean, you had one book with MLK. Just, it wasn't even him. It just like had him in the book with other people. He wasn't even the focal point. And like, out of all these books in this bookstore, the radical books were fucking Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton, Winston Churchill, like all these fucking warmongers. Like, seriously. Like, Condoleezza Rice was in there. She was in the same section with Ibram X. Kendi, Robert DiAngelo. It just proves that the neocons and the neolibs are pretty much the same crowd these days. Like, I'm not even shitting you. George W. Bush books were in the same category as all these other people. And someone said that's their idea of revolution. It's like the Ibram X. Kendi type shit. And I'm just like, if people really believe that that's the revolution, then it's like, how do you change people's minds when everyone's telling you that's what the leftists think? That their things are white fragility and white rage. I'm like, and my wife said, I don't know if I'd be interested in that because it seems like it's a beginner's guide for white people.
Well, and that's what it is. Well, that is exactly what it is. Well, I think that's what it is. I think that, it's okay. So there's a really great bookstore in Ithaca that has like a whole section. It's like, I mean, they're owned now by PM Press. It's called like Autumn Leaves, I think. And it's like right there in the middle of Center Ithaca. I'm sorry if I'm saying the name of the place wrong, but it's right there in the Commons. It's a sorry, one second. Mine got distracted. But they have like all sorts of like actual radical books, right? And so I think that there had to be some sort of liberal, like, but at the same time, some of those ideas that we may, take kind of for, I mean, I'm not saying they're pointing people in the right direction because they obviously point people towards the Democrats, right? And stuff like that, and liberal, and mentality and stuff like that. But if that does show a certain amount of progress in that these things are so, my mom got me a shirt, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
That's this is a like it's like a fist and it says peace, love, unity, right?
Uh-huh.
And like, you know, I mean, like she just got that for me at a department store for 75% off, right? It's so ubiquitous in our society that it gives me, okay, like as a, you know, somebody who's been fighting for a while, you know, just seeing that now this is the acceptable, like it is good and acceptable in society to be anti-racist. Like good, like, you know what I mean? Because it used to kind of like not be, right? It used to be like kind of like, you know what I'm saying? That's like that's better than not, right? That's better. That is a positive social progress, I think. You know what I mean? But only having those kinds of books and only having that very, very small spectrum shows to me that we have a long way to go too, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, but we also have these spaces like Autumn Leaves, like Blue Stocks in New York City, like these other places where uh that there is this burgeoning, you know, social wealth of knowledge and stuff like that. It's just we got to get that into the places where, for instance, like Christian Peretti said, uh Tennessee sorority girls who love, like, you know, going to like parties and stuff like that, you know what I mean, are also saying like fuck big pharmaceuticals, you know, like, you know, they become so prevalent in the culture that you know, one company shouldn't be able to determine our laws, the corporation shouldn't be able to be the monolith over our society. That becomes also, but so in the same way we have to look at like the script for whatever the Democrats and the social engineers that, you know, the NGOs and these kind of things, whatever they did in these ways. Obviously, we can't use their channels because those channels are blocked for us, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
have to figure out new channels and different channels, but those channels are there. We have to just create them and cultivate them for this other type of thing that's going to be a thing that the normal person can engage with at least as much as this other thing, and then has some sort of leverage. You know what I mean? And the only leverage I really feel again we have is strike leverage. And I don't think we're going to have one giant general strike one day that demands into corporate lobbyism unless we have a series of smaller wildcat, all sorts of kind of strikes that kind of lead up to that and progress to that moment, right? It's you know, we're going to have these strikes that are kind of general strikes in a region or an area or an industry and
Mm-hmm.
a situation, or the buying out of a corporation by the people itself, of a small business that have like multiple wings or whatever. They all, you know, got a bunch of support from the outside to basically not to save their money, and then they saved that money and they bought the thing, you know, collectively when it was going on sale or something like that, and they collectively turned into it. Seeing these kind of examples over and over again, but it's got to be the people who are organizing these things have to get together on a national level, right? They have to, the people who participated, those leaders have to form a unit, right? They have to come together. They have to develop together to be able to say, hey, this worked, this didn't work. Oh, hey, this what would work in this area, to consult each other, to be organized and to materially engage with each other, and reach out to each other and not and be very, very careful of cliquishness, of only maintaining your areas. Because here's one of the things that's very detrimental that I've had in my time is that it feels like we click off our moments of potential engagement further with like being able to like push our ideas out and share our tactics and generate those tactics into meaningful change, and then push that change out there because we don't have the same media avenues that they do to say, hey, this new change happened in this one area, of course, you know what I mean. And then we don't have the same, but we do have these networks of people throughout the entire country that live in certain areas. And if we did get everybody who was doing this kind of stuff to kind of talk by region, to not be able to suppress the kind of stuff that they're able to accomplish as they accomplish it, and then to talk to other people in their area, in different areas who are having the same problems, and like systemically go like, oh, okay, that's close, boom, that's close, boom, 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 boom. And as they get more and more funding for these things from people who think this thing's working, as people have money to do so, which is not a lot, you know, but then we can see in the very grassroots things. I'm sure there are examples of this already happening,
Mm-hmm.
100%. I think Answer Coalition, PSL, but I think CPUSA still, their leadership is still anything but Trump, right? Because they don't want war, and understandable to a certain extent because you don't want Mexico, right? Like, and like you don't, but like, it's just so, that's the only thing I can say is like I don't want war with Mexico. You know what I'm saying? That's that's the only thing that they've really given me that I can say is like the difference between the two. Like I don't want to go to
Right,
war.
exactly.
Like, and so
The difference worth, putting so much, um, because you're putting your reputation on the line. Because a lot of people, you have to understand when people are first getting introduced to politics and stuff, because ultimately it's political action, it's political movement. Even if people don't like electoral politics, you still have politically conscious people who may not even participate. But the message you're selling to those people is a message that is almost too comfortable, I want to say, because why does it have to be put in a category?
yeah,
My whole thing is like, why not let someone decide themselves based on what you want? Like, what are you proposing? Not what somebody else is doing that you don't like. Like,
yeah,
what does CPUSA stand for?
yeah.
Instead of all this other shit on here. And I think that's what it is, just in general with people. They want to know. I think they genuinely are looking for somebody that is like, okay, who is standing on their principles?
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's just way easier to conform. Maybe that's what it is. You talked about the media outlets. Why don't we unionize some kind of way together? You would think with all these indie leftist people, you would think that there would be way more channels of communication.
Well, here's the interesting thing. So when people have guests on, like, okay, so RBN will have Midwestern Marks on, and you've had people from Midwestern Marks on, and these folks when they collaborate, you might see a spike in viewership for that one video where there's cross pollination. But when they fight, you see everybody from every leftist channel watch that shit. You go what I mean? And so, um, that is there is something going on where by hook or by crook, there is some form of like uh punishment manifestation that like we're ready to, like, I don't know, this may be the same kind of thing, the cultural revolution. Like um there's just like duh, like we have to gravitate towards this certain kind of thought about this not nuanced about things that we don't have. Like I'll at least put this in the wrestling community with the CM Punk stuff, right? We don't know what the fuck happened, right? Um, I hear people. I just want to get away from anything that's like too controversial. I guess like, not in a way that I don't want to like talk about them controversial, but I want to use an example that's not as controversial to people, so that it won't be, you know, Pavlovianly responded to. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know exactly what happened. There's a lot of times where if somebody was in an interview, they may start a sentence or start a conversation, and they may go to a totally different thing, and then they have that one part clipped where it's like they just said that one thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they really were saying something else, and they never got to finish what they were saying, and they really may have kind of spoken in a way that they didn't mean to. They missed a word, and then they never even got to, like. And you don't see the fullness of the situation, but you have a whole bunch of people with their opinions saying things that, like, then people take that opinion and then they go with it, and that's not even on like a thing like wrestling. You know what I'm saying? That it's like people take they have and like, and of course, if you don't have an opinion on something that you can't quite wrap your head around, and you don't say anything about that thing, well, you're not going to get anybody engaging with your content about but if you say something about that topic, your views are going to go up, right? So there's something about that drama, you know, that people want to see. There's something about, you know, between people. This could debates are very are very big, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that maybe um, it's not as the long term hard fighting that organizing does is not a movie. It's more like a documentary or a series, like a long documentary series where you'd be watching. If you were watching it, there's a lot of boring aspects to it. There's a lot of, up until the point where there's the actual exciting aspect, right? And the attention span of the average person who is either works to death, you know what I mean? Like works just so much they just need to sleep, or has the privilege to not have that. There's just and then it's just there's just not a lot of folks who have the lived experience to see how change occurs in any sort of meaningful way, and everybody kind of clicks off into groups, and there's not like a whole and so so like I want to give PSL their candidates. I really like them, and I think
Cruz and Karina Garcia, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, and I really like them, and I think that I love Cornel West too, and if he's on my ballot and they're not, or vice versa, I will vote for one of those two. Right, that's gonna be who I'm voting for. I really like PSL's Socialist Reconstruction book. I think it's really, really worth checking out.
I've read it. I've tried to get some people on. I did have Tina Landis on. She was one of the co-founders of the PSL. We talked about her book, Climate Solutions Beyond Capitalism, that's published within the Liberation School from PSL, and the Socialist Reconstruction of the United States. I read that too by PSL. That was a compilation of a bunch of them. Yes, Stephanie Kinesick, Eugene, Tina, like a bunch of people contributed to that book. And the whole point was to try to get several people on to discuss that book, but I unsuccessfully. I think I lost interest in it because I'm able to get different types of people on from those circles. Brian Becker was another one from the Answer Coalition.
Answer Coalition is awesome stuff too.
But I think what you're saying, and we may have to cut it short within the next 10 minutes because I have to go get my son. But something you said resonated with me. I really try to refrain from bringing up other like people within the media space, like that are so-called independent. But when it's relevant, I like to do it. And what you're saying definitely hits a nerve because I want to believe that this. I'm not saying that I believe this is a one-of-a-kind forum. First of all, I have a doctorate in philosophy, which a lot of just ordinary podcasters don't have. But I feel like I have a proximity to the people that those people don't have. Yeah. First of all, I have an expertise in Latin America, specifically literature. But the goal of this podcast, honestly, I'm really trying to start something from the ground up. So I'm not going to not invite people as part of Texas on anymore. I don't care if I have 2-3 million people. I'm not going to stop inviting Jay Carico on. I'm not going to stop inviting people on from the community on. Oh, yeah. A lot of these podcasters, honestly, to me, are limited hangouts. Yeah. They rely on each other, and I've gotten several invites from people. Kiko, do you want to join this group? Join it? I'm like, nope. And that's the one thing that scares me about collectivism is I think it can be good, but I think in this situation, I think if something's working, it needs to keep working this way. Like, I just don't think that I don't think anyone can tell Kiko's story. Yeah. Because I know what my story is. I don't need a band of people to help tell that story of mine. Totally. So it's kind of like, I think independent channels can do that on their own. And I think people like RBN, only RBN knows what is in their hearts and what they want to do. Yeah. I think there's a problem though when you start cross-pollinating these groups because I think they're just different agendas, honestly. And I think that there's a danger that the same system that they're trying to overthrow becomes a part of their um, artistic angle, and clickbait is a big part. Now, I think people would see this forum as, I've heard people say, I'm not going to out names, but I've heard people say, Kiko, you should have like 20,000 subscribers, man. Like, I know you're only a year in, but you should have 20,000 subscribers.
Well, great guess, man.
But they
You're
think,
really
but
good. You're really
but
good
it's
host.
because I think it's because it's too educational. I think it's because it's too to the point. I don't think that there's not enough drama because we don't believe in, honestly, that's not my driving force is drama. Like I try to bring on libertarians, like a lot of the people that are going on those shows, honestly, they would never invite the types of guests I have onto their shows.
Totally.
Because their audience is a certain type of composition, and my audience is a very different composition. A third of my audience is outside of the United States. So it's automatically a different audience. Jared Ball's Black Power Media audience, a lot of those people wouldn't fuck with the guests that I bring on. Because they would never give those people a chance. They will automatically assume that those guests would never understand their reality, I think. But maybe that's because they're doing something totally different.
Right. And I think that like what you're doing is something that like is gonna bring so many people to so many different like new voices that they haven't heard before, and get to hear them talk about things in a way that they wouldn't have get to hear them talk on other programs and stuff like that. So I think it definitely serves a really powerful purpose, and I think it's a really awesome endeavor. And I think that this is a badass show, and I love being on it. And I think that when I speak to it, the goal, not of any particular individual forum or medium, but of the left, like the communists, the Marxist Leninists, the folks who want to end corporate lobbyism, to smash the bourgeois state, to develop a workers' democracy. The is that we will, outside of independent individuals, would be that there would be some sort of way to have a mass line that was made up of actual demographic surveys from the various regions that they come from the various, like, democratic councils would have to be formed. Like there have to be these kinds of, there is like a very particular strategy that's pretty self-evident, in reality, but it's just that there has to be those channels of, and so at some point there would be, not like, but there isn't right now. And so anything that we're doing right now is useful. Like, okay, like for instance, some things that would be adventurism if there was a party that was able to do the kinds of things that we needed to do aren't right now. You know what I mean? Because they're just activists. They're organizing and they're doing something and they're trying their best and doing stuff. But the thing we want to reach is an organized, like, thing that can respond to a spokesboard for revolution, a thing that can respond to different things and move and stuff like that. And of course, all of these things will be part of it, and they can exist outside of it and within it. And and I guess, so I don't mean to speak to anyone's particular platform or anything like that. Like I find myself very often being like more of a yes and person than, because I really love what everybody's trying to do. You know what I mean? And so I don't mean to say that we need to have drama or that we need to have, you know what I mean? I think that's not, that's not or that we need to like again, to go back to the backward and forward thing. We don't need to be where we don't have to go back and start saying backward things to appeal to the backward masses. That's what I meant by that whole thing. Like, you know what I'm saying? We can be progressive. We can be pro-Palestine. We can be, say the things that aren't popular or just uncomfortable. We can say fuck the Democrats. We can, without saying I love the Republicans or anything like that. We can say both. Like we can say fuck the duopoly. But it's just that when they're in power, of course, we're going to talk more about the people in power than the people who aren't in power.
Right.
Like, when other guys are in power, we'll fucking talk about
anyway. You would think so anyway, but but Jay, I hate to cut you off, but I'm actually, and I'll put this out now. This is October, right? We'll probably have you back on in November because honestly, there's so much labor activity going on. The Kaiser Permanente
Yeah.
have reached settlements. Their union did with Kaiser Permanente. You have the GM Ford and Stellantis situation going on. Sean Fain is saying that there's probably going to be more striking going on.
Yeah.
They're striking particular plants, the Arlington, Texas plant, and the one in Kentucky, the Ford one in particular. So there's a very strategic angle that these people are taking when it comes to the strikes. It's not like every plant
Yeah.
across the big three, the Detroit big three, is very specific. I think it's only five. It's like five total plants, right, within the three companies.
Yeah, they're doing like they're calling them like at midnight or like 12:04 or something like that, and being like, "You're going on strike tomorrow," and like and because they're really like looking at it, they're really strategic. That's why okay, like that's why I give Sean Fain the benefit of the doubt in the previous thing.